React tutorial on handling user input and events. We just want to continue on now that we know a little bit about React functional components, and then we looked at React class components for more classical React. We're going to introduce a new concept for managing state, so we can use a functional component in the form of hooks, React hooks. I've already taken the liberty to run npx node package manager, node package executable, and I've already scaffolded out. And what I meant by that is npx create React app, and then whatever name of the project you wanna create and scaffold out. When you run that, that'll actually go and use create React app. It'll create this project here that's already generated for us, and it has the structure here with node modules. All the packages are installed. The source, the public folder, so it's all set up for a React application to quickly get up and running. As you can see, the package.json has all the dependencies we need. We are on React 18, so we are more current. And like I said before, with React class components, that's React 16 and prior. That's what you had to use, and sometimes you may be on a project where you need to support that. But we have already looked at the syntax, and we know that the class components there's a lot of extra markup, and different keywords like this keyword and the set state function that comes with it, and just different things with binding that it's not exactly convenient to use, and it can be a little bit confusing sometimes when you're going back and forth between functional components and class components. For this tutorial, we really want to focus on the handling the user input and handling the events that can fire, working with markup or form within the JSX. So we want to kind of abstract away some of the complexities from class component because it can get quite long, and you'll probably appreciate at this point now the convenience that hooks will bring. All right, so first of all, we have this running. This is the React scaffolded out site ready to go. A little bit of style, a little animation. We haven't done this before. We could directly go into this app.js. By the way, just to recap, the entry point for React is the index.html again, the index.js, which is going to run our app component, and then it's going to render that in the root element, which can be found in the index.html. I always just want to mention that. And then, so we can go in this app.js, and we don't really need this markup now, so we can remove this, and maybe let's minimize this a little bit here so we can see what's happening side by side. You can see it actually updated, so now it's a blank screen. Let me just kind of clean this up a little bit here and fix my window a little bit. We can leave this style if we want to. I'm not going to go too much into UX styles. Just know that if we wanted to continue styling this app that we build, and the form, we could use something quick like Bootstrap, our own handcrafted CSS, or go outside and grab one of those products like Material UI to help us with these forms. Quickly, I'll just put a couple markup tags in here, just an H1, which is a header, React input events and forms. When I actually save that, you'll see it update. And then the first go around is we want to be able to add a web controller component that comes with HTML, which is really simply just a text. We give it a type text for an input, and just give it a placeholder. And this has nothing to do with React. This right now is just HTML5. So it gives us a little entry point, a little web component that should allow us to enter our name. If you notice that in our JSX here, it has some of those attributes, and there's nothing there's nothing we need to do special for JSX. You see for keywords like class, we need to use the camel case class name because that's special. Because class is special to JSX via class components, it means something. We need to kind of protect it. But for a lot of this HTML, you can look at markup and examples and use it directly. Aside from some of the event handlers, perhaps, and there's some nuances in JSX you need to know about. But we're good to go. So we could build out a little bit of an app that can take some interaction from a user. So very simply here, we have just an input component. We're ready to go, but we need to add some functionality now to this. So first of all, what's going to be a little bit different is we're actually in the app.js. And, before we used to do, we used to just get in the habit of creating other components. We could do that at the end where we can extract all this out and put it in a separate component. To build an app, I'm just showing we can do it directly here if we wanted to. And now we want to somehow grab some interaction from the user. So how you could do that is you would have to create, we've already have to create a handler. So we've already seen on a button where we used to have a button before. Let's just say we have a button here, a button element, click me. And on this button, on HTML button, we would have that camel case event handler for on click. And we would need to give it those interpolation braces. And what we'd have to do to handle that on click, create a little function method that will handle that on click. So I'll give it a little bit of an alert, clicked. And then in my JSX, you can see right away it is actually compiled with problems because it is trying to evaluate something that is not there. It needs to actually have something to evaluate. We want to pass this by reference, and we don't want to invoke this because we will get into an infinite loop. You'll see I will never be able to get out of this click component, or in this scenario, it will fire when the component renders first. It'll be invoked right away. So now after that, it's a dead link. I can't. It doesn't give me what I expect it to. So we don't want to do this. We don't want to invoke it right away. We just want to pass it by reference so that forever it'll fire when a user actually clicks that particular input. So much in the same way, we need to add an event handler to track changes from the user, as they're typing into the input box. How we do that is it's very similar to now remember, this is all based on JavaScript and the browser events. It's event-driven architecture. The window will load, the window will unload, you'll click, you'll unclick, you'll select, unselect, scrolling. All these things fire events internally. We're just tapping into that. The HTML already had some of these in place. So one of the things we're looking for is when we're typing, we want to fire an event called on change. Well, actually, the event already gets fired. We're gonna tap into that. Normally, we would use on change would be respected in HTML5 and JavaScript in the browser, but because we're using React, we need to camel case these events. So we'd have to say much like the on click, on change, and we're going to want to give it a handler, much like we did already for the on click. So we'll just call it handle input change. And we need to go up and define that in our functional component. Again, we could define it as a function, a vanilla JavaScript way, handle input, and we could just do this, right? That is exactly the same as ES6 arrow syntax, which is just a more compressed way of doing it, more shorthand. This is perfectly fine. This translates and compiles to a function anyhow. So it's just a syntactic style. And like I said before, the newer JavaScript tries to give us some shorthands to eliminate some boilerplate code like writing function all the time. But certainly it is fine. As well as noted, you could actually for functional components, do the same thing as using an arrow function if you wanted to. You could create a const app and say that this whole thing is just a function, much like this if you wanted to, and that is perfectly fine as well. But function holds up and is understood. Here, we're just going to quickly, I'm not going to put an alert here because it'll fire too much, because every time I'm actually entering something into the input, it's gonna fire something. So what I'll do quickly is I'll console log that input changed, and you'll see here that built successfully. I can go to my DevTools, take a look here at my output here. And let me see if I can move this guy here. I can't move that anywhere. So as I'm typing here, you'll see the input is changing. We don't know what's changing yet. We just know it is firing. You could cancel out that. Since we already talked about this prior, we know that when we're firing an event, there is an event internally being fired. And if you're with us for the class components, kind of getting to the underlying event, synthetic event that React provides, there was a little bit of binding that needed to happen in order to get that. You needed to kind of use an internal arrow function in here somehow and try to bind this handle click to this event. But we don't need to do that in the functional component. That's one of the benefits of working in functional components. It knows already what's defined. So we could, for both of these, pass that event or E through the function. It's already there anyhow. We just kind of just ignore it. And what we want to do here, so for the on-click event, that event will be the entire event object, synthetic event object that has the position of the target element, what input was fired. So in this case, if we fired that button and we output it to the console, that event, we'll see it down here as this large object, right? And inside that large object, if we actually did expand the whole thing, I don't know if we can look at it a little bit better, but you would see here there's all sorts of things in there about the positioning on the page in the window, the type, it was clicked. Somewhere deep inside there's a target. Target is the element that fired it, and then on the target there's a value, so you can actually get the value of the button. Now the value of the button might just be click me, but we're more interested in the value of this text box. So we want to be able to know what exactly is changing and what is the value of that input box. So we could go ahead and we could grab this event.target, which would be the text box, and then the value. And that's really what we're after. And if you see when I change this guy here, it'll change. And then as I am typing, oh, I'm sorry. I did that on the click. I did. So if I click this, you'll see here that it didn't output anything for the target. So I guess the button doesn't have anything in the target. But if I did the same thing here and I use my template literals from ES6 JavaScript, more modern, backticks, I use my template, $, and then the braces, and I use the same thing, e.target.value, and save this guy. When I go back, clear my console, and as I'm typing, you can see each time I'm typing in the keyboard, I am firing that. That event, and it's got the target. So we have a value. So that's great. That's really great. So if I wanted to do something like this, and let's just say I had a message or I had a name and I set it to nothing at first, and inside of my, let me just collapse this click handler because we're not using it. Inside of my handler for input change, I'm going to go ahead and change this guy to the target.value. And then somewhere in my JSX, I'm going to, in my I'll create another, maybe a smaller header here. Or what did I say? I said it was a paragraph, right? So sorry, I'll just put this on the bottom here. Underneath all this markup, I'll have a paragraph, and inside that tag, I will use my like a hello world, but I'll use that interpolated value here, hello name, and then I'll save that. When this refreshes, you can see that hello is being outputted there. Let's make this, just because I'm demoing here, let me just create a little bit of a header so you can see it a little bit better. You can see that there. Of course, if we added something more to it, I don't know, we'll just say hello world here. If we wanted to do that, hello world, save that, it'll be hello world. But we want this to update, like we're firing this event, and we would like this to update so that if we type in there and it says a runtime error, okay, because it's saying, okay, I understand, it's saying right now you cannot, and that is what we want with JavaScript. We locked, because we're using ES syntax with constants, we're locking it down so that nobody can change it within the scope of the application, which is why I'm getting this lint problem saying that you cannot do that. So if I change this back to a var or a let keyword, and we typed in there, that's fine. And you can see it changing, but it's not re-rendering, and it's not changing. And the reason, again, for that is because we don't have any state, because with React, it's all state-based. When the state tree updates, it forces re-rendering. But we have a problem here because we are in a functional component and we have no access to state. Prior to this, we were looking at class components, and I said we need to, if we want to use state, we need to create a class component, extend from react.components, because that has all of our state mechanism in there. But we've already gone through that, and we kind of know that class components is a bit hard, and it's not as convenient with all the different things like constructors, this keyword, the binding that they use, the set state that they use, all these things. So because, and not to mention, it's hard to test class components except to use jest or something like that. So we have a functional component. We are on React 18. How do I know? Because it's always what you need to do. You always need to check the package.json and see what you're on. And then you need to go look at the docs, because if you get a project that's on React 15, you're not going to have what I'm going to show you in just a minute. But we know React 18 is modern, and it is post update to the React hooks that's available to us now, which is great because now we can use React hooks, and we can make this functional component have state without having to go and create a class component. So first off, what we want to do is in this example here, I think we already have React part of it, or it's not requiring us here. So we could bypass React if we wanted to, because we don't necessarily need to call it out at this moment. I mean, we could do that if we wanted to, just to be consistent, or not. But we really want to grab this hook called useState, and we want to use it from React, from that React library. We're using destructuring to pluck that out. Now, useState is called a hook, and useState is going to give us a function that allows us to set a variable. And with just a little bit of code, it's going to allow us to have this state in this functional component and give us what we want. First up, we need to initialize it. So we don't need this var world anymore. We could just get rid of this guy here. We don't need that. We need to do some initialization, initialize the hook. We don't need a constructor like we normally would have to do in class components. Normally we'd have to call out that constructor, right? And then we need a constructor, I can't even spell it. And we would have to do that and then do our initialization. We don't need this. We can just right at the top of the function define this. It'll come with an array where basically the hook is going to give you, and we're using destructuring in a different way using an array. It gives you two values. It gives you some type of value that you can name. We're going to call it name. And then it gives a mechanism to set state on it, set name. And then you define it using the useState hook, and then you pass in a default value, right? So prior to this, we had the we had the var name was equal to empty string. This is all we're doing there as well. We're defaulting that, and we're defaulting name to be empty string. And then what we have here is we have a variable called name, and then we have a way to update name and state. This is always the pattern. It doesn't matter what you put in there. You could have, taxes or tax, set tax. You can have many of these. Set total, set total, message, set message. This is the pattern. You can have as many as you need in your component. But right away, we have a name and we have a way to update it. Directly still won't work. And you can see here that if I refresh this here, and I can still default this to, if we want to, world. If I go and type, it's going to throw an error assignment to constant variable at handle, because why? Again, even when we are, this is good practice. We don't want anybody overwriting our state value without saying we could do this, but we're basically saying use the let keyword, allow it to be updated. It's not exact. It's allowing it, but again, it's not, because we're updating the variable directly, which I don't know what, perhaps you might want to do that somewhere. It is again not triggering the re-render, because we need to use set name that we defined. We need to use that to re-trigger React to update. So all we need to do here is, we can return this back to const if we want. And instead of directly trying to set the variable, we go ahead and we use this set name and set the current state of that name to target value, which when we use this set name, this should update React. And you can see it now, it's just firing right now it has state. And now I'm in sync, my model's in sync. So that anytime set name is called, this little JSX fragment gets re-rendered, and this little fragment here, this is the one that is updated. So we have state right now out of the box in our function component in a much easier way. So that kind of takes care of the state, at least, because we're looking more at the user interaction. We want to kind of build this out a little bit more. We have the basics of it. And really, when you're building out interfaces, something like a form, it's just really the same pattern. You just use the different HTML controls and components to build it out. And we'll do that in just a second here. Really, when you're building out some type of interface, you can start to see as you're building how a lot of markup, you start building a lot of markup up. Because a lot of these things, they take up a lot of space, and you can put these on, one line if it kind of cleans it up for you. If you want to see it a little bit better, the different attributes on the HTML element that you're using, if that kind of cleans things up for you when you're scanning your document, you could do that just for clarity's sake. Just always try to use tabbing to make sure that everything lines up. And then you can kind of build this out a little bit more, because we're going to do more here. So we have an input box. Maybe we need to add a label to it. We could just quickly wrap. This is kind of old school HTML as well. We always create an open tag. It has a child. It has a body, or it's expecting to have a child element. So you can leave it empty, but we're going to put the text box inside of there. So we have a label, and we're wrapping the label as name, and then we are going to wrap that as an input. Let's save it. Hopefully it re-renders as we expect. Because I'm not using CSS in this example, it's not going to be the most beautiful interface, but we're just focusing on the JSX here and React event handlers. I want another component, or another input box. We could copy this and paste it. I like to say, instead of copy paste, reuse and apply. Just know that if you're doing that, you just have to make sure that you're not blindly copying things. You need to make sure that you know exactly what you're going to change, because that leads to defects down the road. And I'm just going to quickly change this to email, and I'm going to change this to make it email specific. And instead of input change, I could create a brand new handler for if I wanted to keep things a little bit cleaner. I could do this, and I'll get back to the a shared function in a minute. I could just create two separate ones, and I often see that a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But over time, you'll see how it builds up, how having so many handlers is a lot to manage, but it's your choice. So we have a handler set up for the text box, and we have a handler set up for the email. And what am I missing here? If I click save here, you can see it renders on the same line. Maybe we want to put a little bit of a spacing. Again, we're not using CSS, so we can directly use some old school tags like break. And the break tag, we'll put it on a new line. Again, it's not looking too good, but it's going to do what we want it to. Let's just focus on the React part of this, and we can always dress it up later. We have a pretty basic little form here. If we wanted to add another break point, a break here, break line, kind of push that out a little bit, we can. We could, of course, improve this a little bit here. So we have, maybe we'll put this as name now instead of hello. And we're going to want to do the same thing with email. And we're going to try to have a variable for email as well. That will break if I have to save it, right? Because it's not defined. So that's expected. And it's the same pattern exactly as we've been building this out. What do we need to do here? We need to create a handler, but first of all, it's a little different here. So you can see here we have a handler, and maybe we might want to, add some more of these attributes here. So now that we have two input boxes, we need to ways to distinguish between the two. So it's always good to have like an ID or name. So this one is going to be called name, and it's going to have an on change. It's going to have an on change here. We could also give the, map the value back. So this is actually interesting. So if we were to put value here, and we're going to map it back to the name. And the reason why you do this is because these components internally have their own state out of the box because they're web components. They have their own state, so that we're in a situation where we're adding our own state to the component, and we kind of want to override the default behavior so that the value of this input box is coming from the component itself, not the internal workings of this input box. So we're kind of just, this pattern here is overriding the default behavior of that input control. And we're just saying that we're placing a handler on here, and when state is actually updating, this is the value that you should reference, is what is inside of this component. So it's just a way of overriding that internal state, and it's a pattern you often see doing. So we should get rid of this here, because this is not going to be a text box. This is going to be an input that is of type email, type equal to email. And that'll give us a little bit of, I believe, well, if it was a type password, it would give us the masking that type email. It just helps with validation, because we could add in HTML, we could add a validator on here, and it would check, is it the right format? Does it have an @ symbol and a .com and all that? And we want to link up the email, which we haven't created yet. So we need to do the same pattern up here. That, let's make this empty string. We're going to create a constant email with a set email, and then we're going to do the same thing. Use state and default that to empty string. You can see here returns a stateful value. Was version 16.8.0 is when this hook became available to you. Like I said, if it was prior to 16.8 in your React versioning, you would have to do class components. And what else am I missing here? So if I quickly run, create my I create my name and I go to enter my email, and something is happening here. It's not what I would expect it. So there's something weird happening. What is happening? Okay, I see my problem here. See, I did the copy paste, and this is not what I wanted, because when you do the copy paste, it does a side effect here. As I was typing in the email, it was setting my hook was firing the name which we got out of sync. So we need to fire, instead of set name, we need to fire the proper hook. So we need to fire set email, and so that when we are typing in the name box, right, it is updating just the name, and might have this, and Mike at gmail.com. So we know that in our internal model, both properties are being tracked properly. So that is why we have separate hooks here that we can use. If we really want this to act, we have a couple text boxes here, but if we were wanting to create something that all interfaces have, which is called a form, and what a form does is when I click a submit button, it'll try to submit it. It's good HTML to have this structure to capture information. It's kind of a common template you'll see in the web. So we can collapse these guys. These guys are good if we want to just kind of collapse out the name. And then what we'd like to do is wrap all of this in at least the input fields in a form tag. And I mean, we can, depending on how you match it up here, you could, if you're good at it, you can kind of eyeball it and just kind of close the tag at the bottom. And then what you normally do with markup, as you can see, it starts growing a little bit. If you want to show that, the other tags belong to one particular tag, a parent tag, you can use tabbing. So that the child elements are kind of indented a little bit, so you can see that, by eyeballing the form tag is the parent tag, and then these are the nested other tags, and within those tags there's probably indenting as well, just so when they're all expanded, you can kind of see where you're at. It certainly helps. So we have a form tag, we have everything bound, we have our events firing. We might want to change this button now because I mean, there's a few ways to do this. You could craft your own on-click handler, but it's more work to do, and then you could do things in there. But you could quickly, if you didn't want to do that, or just for this example, normally you could signify that a button is a submit button. And what that submit button would do is, it's a type. What is happening here with my, you need to close the markup here. Close that tag, and we're going to name this submit. And then we have a submission form. Now, what's going to happen here now is, because the default behavior of the browser is when I click this button, it's going to try to submit the form, and you'll see what happens here. I click that, it tries to post back. It posts back my form, and now it cleared everything. This is not what I want. Because we're going to be building single page applications, SPA, we want to override default behavior. We don't want this to happen. We want to control things on the React side. This is more meant for multi-page applications. Like when you submit something, it posts back and then it redirects to like another page. But we want to override this default behavior. I've talked about this exact situation, and it's a good example to show. So we have this form tag. We're going to quickly create a little handler for this form tag. So we'll create a handle. What do we want to call it here? I don't know. We'll call it just handle submit, and it takes that event, because we're going to use that event. And what we're going to do for now is we're going to alert that. We'll just use a template literal here, and we'll dump out what is in current state anyhow. So we're going to say, okay, the name is, and then we'll do a new line, and then we'll just say email with that interpolated values here with the $sign, and we'll output what's in state at this point. And we're going to fire handle submit, and then what we do here is just add another handler again. It's going to be on submit. Now you can see my auto correct here for React is trying to help me. HTML5 on submit lowercase works with vanilla JavaScript. Again, because we're using React, we need to use the camel case on submit. It's going to set this up with the braces, and we're just going to link this guy to the handle submit, and then we have this mechanism set up. I'm going to type in some information here, 1111, and then 2222, and when I click submit, see that validation there? That validation is already part of HTML5, because when that is actually a very good update in HTML5. It adds some invalidation. So we added this as a type email. So now it is expecting us to have that ampersand in there for us. And that's really good, right? So that adds a little layer of validation for us. So I'm going to submit this, and it's going to post everything is in state. That's great. But when I click OK, it refreshes again and it blows away my input. And now I'm stuck, and it's not what I wanted, because I could be doing some things in the UI and it would re-render everything as if it's mounting for the first time. So we need to stop this behavior. And I've talked about this before, but this is something you'll use quite a bit, especially like click events. You want to intercept and stop the default behavior. And how you do that is very simply right on this event for the handle submit. You can do event.prevent default behavior. So if you do that there, you're going to prevent the form from reloading or posting back. Post back is what we used to call it back in the day. So that if we have our name here in the correct email format and I click submit, you'll see that fires. But when we click OK, we're still on the same page. So I can actually, this is what we want. We have taken control of this whole form. We're managing state. We are controlling the default behavior of the browser, and now we're in a good situation to build a React application from here. I would just mention that if you wanted to continue to build this out, you could, once you have something working, this is usually a reason why you want to start with a separate component. Like I traditionally would just create a form component or like a form input component, and I would, move all of this code in there so that, in my app component, I could just, somehow I wouldn't have all of this markup. I would just have in my component, I would have a reference, I wouldn't have any markup here. I would just have somewhere down here, just a form tag, form input tag, which contains all this logic that we just created. This was quick for the demo, but you can see now if you were building this out, then you would have to go create a new component, kind of cut and paste all of the logic out and kind of refactor this out. So it's always good to start with a component first and traditionally use app.js as the entry point. But just to get up and running quickly, we did that. So just to recap, we learned about handling user inputs, how to create forms in React. The really big thing, aside from event handling, is we also learned about this new hook called useState. useState gives a functional component some internal state, so we don't have to use class components. Really convenient for this, for this setup. We don't have to use this keyword, so it's really great for functional components, which are traditionally out of the box static. If you like that and you like more of using these hooks, we're going to learn more about different kind of hooks, and it definitely makes your React development much faster and easier. For the next tutorial, we're going to get deeper into useState and useEffect and some of these other types of components, hooks that will give your functional components more interactivity and help your development environment. So more about that. Stay tuned.